vessel is we have a pastor and we have 2 other parochial vicars that serve basically 4 or 5 churches. And we started to get a ministry together called the Substance Addiction Ministry, and this was a few months ago, actually more like in the summer of 2015. And when we went to start that, we talked with the pastor, and he said, Dan, he says, it's just going to be up to you and your team because I have no clue when it comes to addiction. He says, I don't have anybody in my family that's close to me. He said, I don't have any acquaintances, so I know really nothing about addiction. That was a telltale sign for me and for our team, because on any given Saturday or Sunday, the clergy person could be up in front of his congregation. Their percentages are such, if they had 100 people, that 1/3 of them are somehow affected by addiction, either directly in their family or someone that's close to them or someone that they know. That's a lot of people. So that's 30-some people out of 100. And yet, the clergy was not in a position, as they told us, to be able to help someone. So someone came forward to them and said, Reverend, Pastor, I have this situation within my family. He or she was not going to be able to help them too much. So what we want to do is, again, identify these different stakeholder groups, and we'll probably have 3 classes just for clergy. Signs and symptoms of drug abuse, also addiction, basic addiction, and addiction in the family, so that when someone in your congregation comes to them, they might not be an expert at being able to help them, but what they'll be able to do is get them pointed in the right direction. And we always talk about getting people in the hands of the professionals. There are people out there that this is what they do for a living, is help people get the assistance that they need. So that's a little bit of how this all came about. As you know, there's no cost for this. We're trying to educate the public, and the more that we do that, the more out of those 12 stakeholders that we do that, then we start to melt away the stigma a little bit. Because we'll talk about that too. The stigma that gets attached to people that become addicted to substances. And we'll talk about that. Please ask questions as we go throughout. This is not formal. You want to blurt something out or ask a question or make a comment, please do. Just keep it kind of relaxed. Do you know where the restrooms are? Okay. Feel free to get up at any time. Use the restrooms. Coffee hopefully will be done pretty soon, but there are donuts over there, so feel free. And again, you don't have to wait for a break. Just get up and move around and enjoy yourself. Okay? Any questions so far? Okay, good. I'm going to talk a little bit about addiction, and this is probably one of the most telling statements when it talks about addiction. The more we keep it a secret, the more power that we give it. Why is addiction such a secret?
Shame.
Shame. Part of that stigma, right?
Mm-hmm.
We know that out of all the people that end up contracting this disease, the 75% of them don't get treated. And the primary reason that they don't get treated is because of the stigma, because of the shame. They don't want to admit that they have contracted the disease and then step forward to get help. 75%. That's quite a number when you consider that anywhere between 25 and 40 million people in the United States have a substance addiction problem. A lot of people.
Dan.
Yes?
My father was an alcoholic, and growing up, we tried to keep it a secret. The whole town knew, so I don't know what we were trying to prove, but we didn't understand that at the time. I was just a kid, that he died, he was 54 when he died at a massive coronary. He was addicted to alcohol, cigarettes, women. I mean, he just was addicted to it all.
Those ones that they tell you are going to get you, right?
Yeah.
As far as that. Well, thank you for your comment, Barb. Yes, that's, and times have changed. People are a little bit more open about it than they were in the past. Because years and years ago, I mean, there's things that I found out about my parents after they were gone. Now, none of them had to do with addiction, but there were things that they just didn't tell you because they felt that they were protecting you. Well, now it's changing a little bit. People are becoming a little bit more open, but it's quite a secret. Let's talk about the objectives of what we want to be able to walk away with from this morning. First of all, we're going to define addiction. What does it mean? We're going to recognize that addiction is a disease of the brain. I have a video that I hope to be able to show you if it works right for me. Ask one. It's been giving me fits this morning. Also, we want to talk about the consequences of addiction. What happens, as a result, and also various stages of addiction, because a person who does contract this disease goes through various stages. So that's what we hope to accomplish this morning. Then we'll take a break and we'll go into the other course. This is the culture of addiction in the United States. Addiction is present in all cultures. However, it is possible that the American experience is one that makes us more prone to the risk factors associated with addiction. And that is a statement from the Pennsylvania Recovery Organization Alliance. That's who sponsored the courses that I went through. And when we talk about the American experience, it is that, well, everybody's running everywhere all the time. And it seems like that there's never a break. When I was growing up, it seemed like a much more relaxed culture. But today, you can go down the road, and if you don't run through a yellow light, like the person behind you is on the horn screaming at you to get through that yellow light. It's just, everything is a quick fix, instant mentality, bootstraps mentality. And that contributes to the American experience. Not that people are only addicted in the United States of America. They are across the whole world. Here's one example that is very interesting. USA has 5% of the world's population, 4.4 exactly. I mentioned this last night to you. But we consume 80 to 85% of the world's opiates. Okay? We have 80 to 85% of the opiate addiction problems right here. How you doing, Amy?
Good, sorry.
Oh, not a problem.
What's included in opiates?
Opiates are painkillers, and Amy, you're going to help me with this one.
We'll be talking about that.
What are all considered to be opiates?
We'll all be going through all of that. So.
We've got Vicodin,
Vicodin, Percocet, OxyContin, oxycodone, hydrocodone, Operna, Norco. They're all different names for the same medication. We'll talk about that.
she's a wealth of knowledge. She could spit more stuff out just like that than it takes me all week to study for. Here are some of the statistics I went over last night if you were here, over in the auditorium. First of all, 126 people died each day in the United States due to drug overdoses. That's the equivalent to a 747 crashing with no survivors. It turns out to be, basically every 12 minutes. So if we're here for 3 hours, we're going to lose about 15 people in the United States by the time that we're here, during the time we're here. There's 7 people per day in Pennsylvania that die due to overdoses. Now these are the deaths, And when you talk about the deaths, the number of people that are addicted, it's again like the tip of the iceberg. In Lawrence County here, 1 to 3 per week. There have been a few days where we lost 2 or 3 in one day. This one stuns me. Every day, 2,500 American youth aged 12 to 17 abuse a prescription pain pill for the first time. 2,500 a day. So that's 25 potential addictions per day, on top of what we already have. Pray God that, out of those 2,500, they don't all become addicted. But they are trying to abuse a prescription pain medication pill for the first time. 2,500 a day. I already mentioned this one, that we have 4.4% of the world's population, and we consume 85% of the opiate medications. The number of opioid prescribed to young adults, we say young adults, this is age 15 to 29, doubled between 1994 and 2007. And the big cause of that was OxyContin. OxyContin came in the mid-90s, And about the same time, pain was added as the 5th vital sign. And so OxyContin was approved during basically the same year. I mentioned this last night. The first year, there were 316,786 scripts written for OxyContin. Okay, that was in 1996. 6 years later, in 2002, 7.2 million scripts were written for OxyContin. Okay, so in 6 years, we went from 300-some thousand to 7.2 million. In 2012, 259 million scripts for opioid pain medications. So this is broader. That's like Percocet and all the ones that Amy was talking about. So it's 259 million scripts written in 1 year. Again, that's enough for a 30-day supply for every adult in the United States. Tom Friedman, the director for Center of Disease Control out of Atlanta, about 3 weeks ago made the statement that one 30-day supply of an opiate is enough to turn a person into an addict. Power of the opiates that are out there today. And then finally, 75% of prescription opioid dependent individuals switch to heroin because it's cheaper. Okay? Basically have two causes, and we'll get into those. Here's some of the contributing factors we already mentioned. Our pick yourself up by your bootstraps mentality that we have in the United States. Rugged independence. The quick fix culture, and also approval of FDA by highly addictive painkillers, and then pain added as the 5th vital sign. So that's a little bit of a review of what I just covered with you. Back in last summer, Time Magazine came out with a big article, and it was talking about that they're the most powerful painkillers ever invented. And they're also creating the worst addiction crisis America has ever seen. Okay? It was kind of a systemic perfect storm. When you add pain as the 5th vital sign, and at the same time, you have OxyContin hitting the market. By the way, the producers of OxyContin, they're called Purdue Pharma. They were actually fined $600 and some million for misrepresenting the addictive nature of OxyContin. In other words, they said it's not addictive. That's when my son got his start on OxyContin, and then it went to heroin. Here's the definition of addiction by the American Medical Association. It is a primary chronic disease with genetic, psychosocial, and environmental factors influencing its development and its manifestations. Primary refers to the nature of addiction as a disease in addition to and separate from other pathophysiologic states that may be associated with it. In other words, addiction is a disease in and of itself. It meets all 5 criteria for a primary chronic disease. Okay? That declaration took place in 1956. Okay? So when we talk about alcoholism, we're including that in this definition because alcoholism is an addiction. It's an addiction to alcohol. So since 1956, that's a long time. I was 2 years old. And I always put these in here. From the outside looking in, you will never understand it. But from the inside looking out, you can never explain it. In my son's journey through addiction, which, as you'll find out in the next course, has been there quite some time. Basically since 2002, 2003. Is one of the hardest things as a parent to try to understand is that, and accept, is that it is a disease. It took me most of that time to come to the realization that it is a disease. I always felt that he had the choice to quit. Okay? But once he was addicted, he can't stop on the basis of their own sheer willpower. Okay? It takes help. takes assistance. And we'll talk more about that too. As I mentioned, 1956, here's the 5 criteria. Patterns of symptoms. It's chronic, not acute. It is a progressive disease. A person is subject to relapse. It is treatable, but is potentially fatal if left untreated. And I mentioned this already, about 126 per day that we lose, 7 per day in Pennsylvania, and nationally 1 person basically every 10 to 12 minutes that we're losing people. Comparison to other chronic diseases. And one of the things, I don't know, do any of you get on social media like Facebook or anything like that? Okay, every once in a while, well, maybe it's once a week, twice a week, or whatever, you'll see someone that will make a comment about addiction. Maybe it's sometimes in response or reaction to an overdose. Someone might post an overdose. There's I know there's a page that follows the scanners. In Lawrence County Breaking News 2 is one that what they'll do is they'll put on Facebook what the scanner just came across the scanner. And they'll say, well, 25-year-old, so-and-so, well, no names, but potential overdose. And then sometimes you'll start to see, here goes the dialogue. Okay, has anybody ever seen that? You seen that?
Yeah.
You know, what's that dialogue look like?
It's mean.
It gets mean. It gets very mean. And part of that obviously has to do with the stigma. Some people will say, well, you know what, just let them die.
I've heard that.
You know, you'll see that on there. And you'll see people counter that and say, well, you wouldn't say that if it was someone in your family. So sometimes there's these little arguments that take place. I try to stay out of them anymore. I used to get sucked into them. I don't do it anymore. But the biggest thing that you see really is that, number one, it's not a disease. That's what people say. It's not a disease. There's no way. They chose and they choose to use. Okay? So, it's not a disease. Well, I can say that in my son's case, yes, he chose to use. He tried a highly addictive drug when he was younger, and he got hooked. Okay? Sometimes it's peer pressure. We'll talk about those reasons a little bit later. But in other cases, we've had people that had legitimately prescribed pain medication. They had been through maybe an accident or something similar and got prescribed the pain medication by their doctor and end up being hooked. Okay? So when we talk about comparison to other diseases, the same predictive factors of relapse as compared, this is substance addiction as compared to asthma, type 1 diabetes, and hypertension, the same predictive factors. It is also influenced by genetic, metabolic, and behavioral factors. Okay, so there's some similarities. Drug classifications. Number 1, tobacco, which is a very difficult, the nicotine within tobacco is very difficult to break an addiction from. I know that one for a fact myself. Alcohol, marijuana, opioids. I talk a lot about opioids because that was really the kind of drug of choice that my son had was opioids, but stimulants also, cocaine, club drugs, ecstasy. There are different types of club drugs that are out there. Now, I heard some the other day. We were here yesterday with students from Newcastle, and Amy, the lady who just walked through here a few minutes ago, she was asking them, about different drugs. They were talking about stuff I never heard of. So there's something new happening all the time. Dissociative drugs, hallucinogens, prescription drugs, over-the-counter medication, and other compounds. There's just a ton of different things that people are actually trying. Some of them are actually scary when you hear about what they're doing. Whoever came up with the idea about bath salts? I mean, who does this stuff for the first time? I have no clue. It's like, I wouldn't want to do that. The different stages of addiction. Use, first of all, then abuse, then dependence, and then addiction. 50% of the time, the first use is a choice. Okay, that's a general percentage that's assigned. Remember we talked about people say, well, you chose to use. That's true 50% of the time. It could have been peer pressure, could have been that they were at a party and someone, hey, you want to feel great? Here, try this. Okay? And they end up trying it with today's highly addictive drugs. You know, we've been told that a person can try heroin one time and be hooked. So, the other time, 50 to 80% of the time is due to a legitimate prescription. Then you move from the use to the abuse, and then dependence, and then finally addiction. Oh, there's a little graphic on the right side. The first addiction is maintained by pleasure, but the intensity of this pleasure gradually diminishes, and the addiction is maintained then through the avoidance of pain. Has anybody ever heard the term chasing the high?
Sure.
Okay, what's that mean to anybody? Chasing
You
the
keep
high.
trying to get back to where that first hit was.
Did you hear Gloria? You try to get back to that intensity of that first high. And that's one of the fallacies about an opiate or heroin, is the fact that supposedly the first time the person gets high is the best that it's ever going to be. So they spend the rest of the time chasing, trying to get that level of intensity of a high to return again.
Dan, how about the escalation of drugs? As like the lady said yesterday, they start out smoking a little bit of pot, but that's not good enough, so then they throw some cocaine on it, and then they do this and that. That's kind of not mentioned.
Yeah, well, that's true. One of the things that Amy was talking about yesterday, and she was making the case about marijuana. Did anybody see that besides Ray? Anybody see Amy's presentation last night? Amy Klump, okay. She was talking about, well, she's from Ohio. She was talking about medical marijuana and the efforts to get that approved and where everything's at right now. But, you know, I will say this, that in this, I'll come back to you, Ray. My son started on marijuana. Okay, and there are people that will argue that it is a gateway drug. There are people that will argue that it's not a gateway drug. Okay, what we learned when we went to the classes that were the Pro A classes is that whether it's alcohol, whether it's tobacco, whether it's marijuana, whether it's these different classes of drugs, there is a section in the brain called the limbic section of the brain. Anybody ever hear of that?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, what do you think is in there?
Yeah.
There you are, exactly right. This is where the pain, pleasure, that part of the brain takes place. And whenever you use these substances, it stimulates that section of the brain, and what it'll do is it'll elevate the dopamine levels. That's where they get the name dope, because it gives you that pleasure sensation. Once you open that gateway, it's the same gateway as it is for all these different drugs. And again, tobacco will do it with nicotine, marijuana will do it, alcohol will do it, heroin will do it, cocaine will do it, all these different types of drugs. That's the area of the brain that it targets. That's the area of the brain that it affects. And another thing that takes place when we're talking about chasing the high is the person will start to build up a tolerance. Okay, so then in order to get the effect like they want, then they have to start using more. Okay, so they'll take higher dosages, or if it's not a higher dosage, what they're looking for is a stronger, more pure type of drug and that type of effect. Matt, you looking for the legal classes?
Yes.
Right around the corner.
Oh, okay.
This is what makes drugs so dangerous. Now, I'm sure you've heard about the recent overdoses that have been taking place in the last few months where people, the rash of overdoses that we have been seeing recently. And more, what they're seeing is either a more pure version of heroin, or they're seeing fentanyl being cut in and mixed in with the heroin. Why would we add fentanyl? What is fentanyl?
Painkiller.
It's another painkiller, right? And my understanding is It is so powerful, it's measured in micrograms
Right.
instead of milligrams.
Exactly. MCGs, yes.
Yes, and could be 50 to 100 times stronger than morphine,
Yes.
okay?
How it's absorbed.
So, we're thinking, well, why would somebody want that mixed in with their heroin? Chasing the high, exactly. They want the stronger heroin. One of the worst things I've ever seen on TV, and we'll take a break after this bothers me. You know how they'll come on and they'll say, it'll be a news show, and they'll say, there's a very deadly, dangerous, bad batch of heroin that's out there in the streets today, okay? And then they'll show you a packet that has the name of the stuff on it. And it's like, to me, I'm going, duh, because you do have addicts that are going to be chasing after that heroin because it is so strong, they don't think they're going to overdose. They don't believe they're going to overdose. They actually are going after that deadly batch of heroin because they think it's going to give them the strength that they need to get the high that they need. And what happens? More overdose deaths. You know, if they're going to warn and they're going to say, hey, we've got a deadly batch of heroin out there, that's okay. I don't have a problem with that. Don't show a packet that has the name of it on there.
It's not intentional.
Pardon me?
I believe that's intentional.
That's wrong, to be honest with you, to do that. Because you're telling the people exactly what batch to go get.
But they don't care.
Yeah. So that's a little pet peeve that I have that sticks in my craw. But anyhow, why don't we, we've been at it here for about 35 minutes. Why don't we take 10 minutes? Looks like I see is the coffee done there, Bruce? Not quite, but does it look like it's cleaned up again here? Thank you for allowing us to take a break. The coffee is good, it's on. We're going to talk about the motivation to use drugs and alcohol. And basically the motivation is to feel differently than a person feels now. Okay? And again, it could be that you're growing up. I wasn't that long ago for me. I'm 61 years old. But back when I grew up in the 60s and 70s, I tried pot. That was the thing to do back then. You're out hanging out with your buddies, you're going to the bar, or whatever. But I didn't like it. I found out that I didn't like the booze either because it made me feel different than myself, and I liked feeling like myself. So it was just, I tried it, I put it away. But some days, today, people don't try and put it away. It's so highly addictive that they just stay with it. But the different motivations are physical pain. Again, we talked about how there are legitimate pain prescriptions, and that those, again, were a perfect storm. I was with a friend of mine about 2 months ago. He had stage 4 cancer. And we went in, I accompanied him because he had to get a test done. So I was in the hospital with him just to give him company because his wife couldn't be there. He had the procedure done. And once he was in recovery room, the next question was, what is your level of pain? You know, from 0 to 10, what is your level of pain? And that's a very subjective type of, you know, evaluation. If you're a wimp like me and don't like pain, then, you know, a hangnail's 10. No, I'm just kidding. But, pardon me? It's 12, okay. But, you know, that is part of the culture which has taken place now because, again, in the mid-90s, they felt that pain was being undertreated. And so that's why it was added as the 5th vital sign, but it kind of went the other way. There's also psychological pain, socioeconomic pain. We hear more about bullying today than I can ever remember, even though it probably existed in previous years. But now you hear more and more about, you know, people not accepting other people and having to be mean to them, having to bully them, doing those types of things. Emotional pain, and there's also spiritual pain. Basically, addiction is a physical, mental, emotional, and spiritual disease. It has those 4 aspects. But again, the motivation is to feel differently or to feel better than I do now. And it may be to deal with all those 5 different types of pain. Factors affecting the pathology of addiction. substance use was an answer to their pathology, but not the cause. Okay, again, we just went over 5 different types of pain which may have led to a person to start to use. It was an answer, but not the cause. The behaviors are closely tied to social and peer groups. Okay? Peer pressure is a very powerful influence, and I think we all know that. Individuals can be easily coerced into initiating and continued behaviors. Peer pressure, pressure by doctors, and prescribed drugs for pain relief. Vulnerability and resilience of the individual, their coping skills, and also exposure to physical, mental, and emotional traumas. So those are all factors, and each person is really different. When it comes to even when we look at the methods to get people into recovery, there's no silver bullet, there's no one size fits all. You'll hear people talk about, well, medical assisted treatment. Well, you don't want methadone, but methadone has worked for some people. You don't want Suboxone, but Suboxone has worked for some people. You don't want Vivitrol, but Vivitrol has worked for some people. So again, there's just no silver bullet. The effects of addiction on the brain, what I'm going to do is I'm going to try to show this at the end of this course. I was messing with this a little bit earlier today and I was having trouble getting into play, but I'm going to try to show it. It's a very good video, and I have extra copies with me if anybody wants them, if we can't get this to work. But really what it does is it shows the human brain. Remember I told you about the limbic section of the brain? And it shows, in this case particularly, how opioids affect the brain and how it attaches an opiate to the receptors in a person's brain. And then once it establishes that, it goes on to talk about withdrawal, okay? So what is actually withdrawal?
When the body misses a substance that it was used to be absorbed in that body.
Thank you, Peach. And it is a big motivation for a person that's addicted to either to increase their dosage because they're either chasing the high, they build up a tolerance, and they're trying to avoid the withdrawal. So again, it takes more and more of the substance to get the desired effect, but it also takes more and more of the substance to avoid the withdrawals. So these people that are heavily addicted, and I'm going to again stay more with opiates, they actually get to the point of where they feel they need to drug to live. That's how it messes up, messes up your reasoning in your head too. Your decisions that you would normally make, and you think, well, how can people make, you read about it in the paper every day, you're hearing it on the news about all these overdoses. So why would a person the next day or that evening stick a needle in their arm with heroin or an opiate in there, knowing full well that this could be the last time that they stick a needle in their arm? And you're sitting there trying to figure that out. Why is that? Why would someone do that? But again, the reasoning section of the brain, it is affected. You're not going to make rational decisions anymore. And you're going to, again, chase the high, or you're going to try to avoid going into withdrawals. I watched my son withdraw on the couch once. It's not pretty. It's not pretty at all. It's like, and he described it to me, it's like, that is like the 100 times worse than the worst flu that you ever had. That's how you feel. You'll get cramps, you'll get chills, you start to sweat. I mean, it's just not a pretty picture. But that's what people do, is that they have to use so that they can avoid going into the withdrawals. And my son, in his case, and we'll talk about it a little bit later, he had to commit burglaries in order to get the money in order to fund his addiction and to stay out of withdrawals. But we'll see if we can get this to play a little bit later, because it is an excellent, excellent video. If not, again, I've got copies of it with me. The biochemistry of addiction, it affects the ability to make decisions. Non-addicted people are easily able to make stop-and-go decisions, okay? For those that are addicted, stop-and-go systems are impaired. The go system is off and running all on its own. The brain is totally hijacked. The patient only thinks about the next high in order to be able to avoid withdrawals. That's where their whole being is centered once they're addicted. And then the ability to reason is severely impacted. I could never to this day still picture my son kicking in somebody's door. That's not him. It's just not him. That's not what his behaviors had been. He grew up differently than that. His behaviors when he was straight, not using, were different than that. Very friendly, very polite. If you were to walk in here today, you'd have never known that he was a heroin addict. But under the use and being addicted to heroin, he did stuff that I just can't believe it. Like I said, I get sick to the stomach just even thinking about him kicking somebody's door in and stealing from them. But he did it multiple times. Recognizing addiction. Different things, but the first of all is an obsession and compulsion, an obsessed need for money. Right? Because, again, not to paint these people as bad, but this is kind of where the stigma comes in. It's because it's one of the few diseases that in order for it to continue, for them to manifest itself, it costs too much money. So it's very, very closely tied with crime. If you go into the prison systems today, you'll find that usually 80 to 90% of the root cause of the person being in the prison was a drug addiction. Okay? So you'll see the obsessed need for money, lying, stealing, and manipulation. And believe me, and again, I don't mean this in a mean, derogatory way, become very, very good at manipulating you. Very, very good at making you feel guilty. Very, very good at being able to find a way to get money out of you or out of someone else. Because again, the motivation is all to be able to get more drug so that they can either get high or in most cases to avoid withdrawals. The tolerance is the seesaw effect, the physical dependence, the psychological dependence, and then there is the withdrawal symptom, which that PAWS stands for post-acute withdrawal symptom. Okay? See, with my son, the way it started with him was, again, start with marijuana and then it went to Oxycontin. And this is the time, some of you, are you all from Newcastle? I don't know. Most of you though? Okay. You may have remember a few years back when we had 4 or 5 doctors that were just flooding the streets with Oxycontin. To the tune of about 50,000 Oxycontin pills in a month. And of course, I think they're probably all serving prison terms now. But my son was part of that, okay? He was there during that time in the mid-2000s, 2003, 2004, when this peak hit the streets of Newcastle. So in his particular case, being that Oxycontin is opiate-based, and he got addicted to that, he told me that at the height of his addiction, now Oxycontin, as we know, is a prescription pill, right? Okay, so it's measured like 20 milligram, 40 milligram, 60, 80, that type of thing. And on the street, it's basically $1 a milligram. So if you were going to buy a 40 milligram Oxycontin, it was going to cost you $40. Okay. At the height of my son's addiction, he told me that he was using 8 80 milligram Oxycontins in one day. 8 80 milligram Oxycontins in one day. Who's our math whizzes?
$640.
$640 a day. Now, is there anybody here that can afford $640 a day? I can.
5,000 a week.
5,000 a week. 5,000. Angelo doesn't even make that kind of money, do you? Yeah, he didn't hear me.
20,000 a month.
Unreal. Well, you see how it leads to crime because they want to, again, desperately avoid withdrawals, and that drives a lot. So that's why, for my son, what it led to was burglaries. And he still couldn't keep up. Okay? $640 a day. Unreal. But why do you think it goes to heroin now?
It's cheaper.
Cheaper to do all the money.
Yeah. They can get a stamp bag of heroin anywhere from a couple bucks on up to $8. And so that's the drug of choice now is heroin. But what's the big danger? I mean, with OxyContin, you knew what you were taking, right? Whether it be 80 milligrams or 60 or 40, you knew that it was OxyContin. Okay, what about the deal with heroin? You don't know. You have no clue. It's illegally manufactured. So you have no clue how pure it is. You have no clue what it's cut with.
Could be baby powder, coffee creamer.
Yeah, it could be baby powder, coffee creamer. Yeah, that's true. It could be fentanyl.
Yeah,
Okay.
they're all for them.
Here's some other signs. In my son's case, a new set of friends. There were people showing up at our door that I had no idea who they were, and I had asked, "Hey, Brandon, who are they?" "Who is that?" He said, "Oh, don't you remember Dad? Good, so and so. They, they were here before." I said, "No, I don't remember." Scruffy appearance. After a while, nothing matters anymore but the drug. Okay, hygiene goes out the window. Uncaring attitude, isolation from others. My son and his girlfriend, who was also a co-user at the time, when we had dinner or anything like that, they would go fill up their plate and disappear. They wouldn't eat with the family anymore, okay, because they didn't want you suspecting that they were using. Sleep all day, up all night. It's another set of symptoms. Sleep all day, up all night. And then, of course, the lying, stealing, and manipulating. So those are some other signs. Consequences of addiction. Physical, weight loss, acne, constipation, insomnia, and risk of overdose. My son lost a lot of weight. Okay, also developed acne, and that's a telltale sign. You're 30 years old, and usually acne's gone, but he had it. He would go in the bathroom and disappear for hours. Because, did you ever hear the Mexican black tar heroin? Anybody ever hear that?
Yeah.
Constipates them like unreal. So he would be in the bathroom hour upon hour upon hour. But there's another thing. When you go into the bathroom, it's also a very private place for them to be able to use, because nobody's going to bother you. Okay? So they might check themselves between their toes, between their fingers. I won't get into all the places that I've heard that people inject themselves. Okay? Mental consequences. Hijacked thinking, lack of reasoning, bad decisions. Emotional roller coaster, go from euphoria to depression. But here's the thing. Remember what we said that the drugs do as far as the limbic section of the brain. And my understanding from my son is, well, what's the big effect of heroin? I mean, what's it do? He said, it makes you feel like you're invincible, Dad. It makes you feel like you're on top of the world. Like nothing can hurt you, nothing can affect you. But what happens too is, like we said, it throws the dopamine levels high. Okay, so if they don't continue to use, you'll find a side effect of a lot of people that have become addicted is they become depressed too, easily. They develop bipolar. If they have that pause syndrome that I was telling you, post-acute withdrawal symptom, often is misdiagnosed as bipolar. Okay? Spiritual, loss of hope, self-blame, and shame. Most people in the throes of their addiction, when they understand and acknowledge that they do have a disease and have the disease of addiction, they're harder on themselves than a lot of other people are. They get wrapped up a lot in their own shame, their own self-blame. And there's a lot of folks that's where they're stuck. They see no hope. They've ostracized themselves from their family. They don't feel loved anymore. They may be incarcerated, and feel like, well, here I am. I'm the scourge of the culture. This is the way that I am. They can't hold a job. So believe me, these folks are feeling this internally about themselves. We don't have to beat them up any more than they're already beat up, because they don't feel like they have anything worth living for. So some of them, and you'll hear this as we go on with some of our efforts in Pathway to Freedom in our classes, that we will have some folks that are recovering addicts tell us, we had one of them, didn't we, Vaughn, that said he had the gun in his mouth and he was ready to pull the trigger. And he got an expression of love from someone who stopped into prison to visit him 3 or 4 or 5 times. And he started to get some hope that someone actually truly did love him, because he said, I lost my mom. She didn't want anything to do with me anymore. And he just wanted to die. He don't have anything to live for anymore. So you'll hear from that person someday in the future. So the consequences are dire. And one of the things that we try to do is to let people know that yes, there is love, there is hope, there is faith. You can make it out of this. Another thing that we see on social media, a lot of them say, you know, people chose to be an addict. Well, no child hopes to be an addict when they grow up. No parent hopes to raise one. No human is immune to addiction. They're talking about breaking the chains. See, it used to be they talked about heroin 20 or 30 years ago as something that you would see in the big inner cities of like New York or Philadelphia or Detroit, that type of thing. And it was just confined, that addiction was just confined to, you know, places that were ghettos and that type of thing. This is as mainstream as any addiction gets. You will find people from all walks of life, from all professions, who contract this disease of addiction. And it is, again, so prevalent that we have an estimated anywhere between 25 and 40 million people. There is hope. The disease of addiction can be put into remission. There is no known cure, but it can be put into remission. Once the patient understands their disease, it is up to them to seek help. There is a responsibility with this. I'm a diabetic, okay? I understand my disease. So I have to manage it. If I go over there and have a donut like I did this morning, I know that later on, sometime today, I have to make up for that as far as my carbs are concerned. That's one of the things that people don't know about diabetics. They say, well, geez, you can't have a piece of cake. Well, yeah, I can. You can't have a piece of pie. Oh, yes, you can. The thing is, you have to count it in with your carbs. And if you want to blow it all in a donut, as opposed to a meal, well, that's your choice. But, see, I have to be responsible to myself. I know what my disease is. I understand it. It's up to me to follow the prescription to stay healthy. Same thing with the person that contracts the disease of addiction. Professional treatment is available. Again, I have some brochures over here. We encourage people to go to our single county authority is Lawrence County Drug and Alcohol. And they are wonderful people. I've been affiliated with them for many years. And this isn't a sales pitch. These are the professionals. They've been trained. They are trained counselors. They're trained case managers. And they can have access to treatment for people that don't have insurance, and they also can help people that do have insurance. So these are the professionals, and that's who I encourage people to go to. Medical assisted treatment is also available. Again, one of the things that to do is they'll assess a person individually, okay? The big thing to do at this particular point is how do you get them to the point of where you can start to treat them? Sometimes that's difficult because people don't want to get treated. You know, they're so caught into their disease and into the addiction, they don't want to get treated. But usually the first steps are detox, okay? Getting the toxins out of their system, getting them stable. And then from the detox, then you can start to move into things like the medically assisted treatment. In some cases, people might be on methadone for a while. Some people may be on Suboxone. Some people, Vivitrol is something that's relatively, well, it's not brand new, but it's a shot that you can get once a month. It's expensive, but it kills the cravings. But you have to get a person to the point of not being dependent for a while until they can start to understand the benefits of recovery. There's 23.5 million people in active recovery. Some of the conclusions are that the individual brains have been altered by drug use. Once a person is addicted, the characteristics of the disease are very similar to other brain diseases. People should be able to quit drug use by sheer force of will alone. That's false. Believe me, if they could, most of them would. You know, when they realize what addiction is doing to their lives. But they can't by their own. They need help. Addiction and alcoholism is the uncontrollable compulsive drug/drink craving, seeking, and use, even in the face of negative health, social, economic, and legal consequences. And addiction is a disease that requires biomedical, social treatment. Any questions? We're going to take our break because we're finishing up this course. I hope that gets you to understand just a little bit. It was not that in depth. You may have known even more about addiction than when you came in here to go through this class. But what we're trying to do is to get everybody at a certain level to understand addiction as a disease and the fact that it is truly a primary chronic disease.
I can't seem to get it through my son's head that it is a disease. And he keeps saying, no, Mom, that's her free will, that's her choice. And I knew I'd get into an argument with him each time. It may have been her choice the very first time she used that needle while she was with a certain friend. But after that, she had no choice anymore. It was to continue to do that just to get through each day.
Yes, and that's an excellent point. Did you hear, Gloria? You know, for some people, like my son, it was a choice at the beginning. He chose to try a highly addictive drug. But the point is, once you are dependent, once you are in addiction, very few people without some type of help can just abstain and no longer use. And that's where we get into those discussions and arguments that, well, it was a choice. It may have been at the beginning, but now it's beyond that. How about the folks that were prescribed pain medication became addicted, okay? The result is still the same. They still have an addiction that they're trying to deal with. But the continued use is not a choice.
Right. In court one day I said to her, is this what you want for yourself? And she looked at me so angry and said, really? Really? You think this is what I want? And it hit me deep down. She does not want to be that way. She just can't find her way out of that.
That's right.
I told her, this is you, Haley, right here in the middle, and all this muck is surrounding you, and you need to find your way out of that muck.
That's right, and there's help, and there's people willing to help. You're exactly right. For me, it took me a long time to understand that same concept with my own son, because I remember having conversation after conversation after conversation. I mean, and you'll see in the next course the cycle for him of in and out, in and out, in and out of prison, and then he would be in prison for months, maybe 18 months, and then when he would come home, I'd say, okay, you haven't used anything for at least 18 months, so the next time that you use, you chose to use. Well, I'll never forget, this is where it finally hit home for me. Even though I was going through learning about this, I still hesitated to say, well, it's a disease. He was out and had been out of prison for a couple, 3 months, and he always struggled to get a job, but he was fortunate to always find one. Well, he found a decent job, and this was actually the second day that he was at work, and I get a call, and it's from his parole, and he said, Dan, we have your son in custody. I said, what? He says, yeah, Brandon's in custody. Yes. He said, for what? What happened? And he said, well, I'll explain it to you. He says, we're headed to the police barracks right now if you want to. He says, I'll call you when you get there and you can come meet with your son. And I said, okay. So they called me and I went over, and Brandon got out of the back of the police car and he was just crying. I could just see it. I could see it. It was the first time that I really saw it this way, in that he didn't want to be there. He couldn't stop himself. What he did is that he started using again, and he had just started using again. He was at Giant Eagle, and it was in the summertime. He was getting ready to go to work. There was this car window that was down. There was a lady's purse in there, and he grabbed it, and he took off. Well, he was witnessed, he was seen, he got the license number, they traced him to work. Okay, he had just pulled in at work his second day on a job, a decent job, and he was arrested. Okay. But I saw it for the first time in his eyes. I didn't want to do this. Why did I do this? It's like he couldn't stop. He couldn't stop. He hated himself, and he couldn't stop. So that's when it hit me. I said, he doesn't like being here any more than anybody else does. He hates this disease. He doesn't know how to stop. He doesn't know the way out. So I understand where you're coming from, Gloria. Yes, Barb?
I missed this, so I want to ask a question. Addiction is a disease, like diabetes and so forth. How do people, how is it that people get this addiction? Are they like born genetically with it?
There are some people that are more predisposed.
Yeah.
Yes, matter of fact, there is a DNA test now that's available.
Oh, really?
They can take a swab to see, it's called a predilection test, and they can see how predilected that you would be to addiction to opiates. Yes. There are more people, there are some people that are more prone to it than
Yes.
others, but for the most part, I think most of us, and why you see this out there so much, that when you're putting, medication into your body, and especially opiate-based or something, well, cocaine, that's not necessarily medication, that alters you, okay? It doesn't
alters
take
you
long.
physically, you mean?
Well, it alters you physically, it alters you mentally. It's putting a foreign substance into your body. Well, what you're doing is you're actually, when you start doing this, you're actually training your brain and your body to actually crave that substance, is what you're doing.
Oh.
It's like people that, smoke cigarettes. I used to smoke. But what happens is you get dependent upon the nicotine, and, so you continually want to put that into your body. You train your body and your mind to say, I need that. And then you can't stop.
I see my father was an alcoholic, and he smoked. My brother drinks and he smokes, but I don't do that. So I don't know why.
You chose not to.
Yeah, you just chose not to.
I'm glad I did.
Yeah, we're glad you did too.
You saw what it did to them.
Okay.
You saw what it did to them, so you chose not to be like that. That's why you don't do it.
Gloria.
On my granddaughter's side, her dad, his father was an alcoholic. My son is an alcoholic. Haley's mother is an alcoholic. Her sister got charged with drug charges, selling out of the house. And so then Haley was drinking, using pills, and then finally heroin. So she had it in her system that it was going to hit her one way or the other, no
Yeah.
matter what.
And Angela mentioned it last night. I don't know if you caught it, but if I'm a parent, which I am, and my wife and I were always like, getting drunk every night, drinking 6 packs of beer, what do you think is going to happen with our children?
Mm-hmm.
So they're probably going to end up doing too. Maybe not, but chances are, yes. So there's so many things that you're a product of your environment. There might be a genetic predilection, there's a whole bunch of stuff that can happen. Who you hang out with, if that's what they do all the time, is party, well then chances are, unless you change your friends, that's what you're going to be doing. So there's so many different factors. But there's enough addictive substances out there, obviously. Coffee, caffeine,